Now, I want to ask you about media coverage, and first, I just want to say that we have already seen a horrifying number of journalists killed in Ukraine. In fact, a friend of mine, the filmmaker Brent Renaud, was one of the first journalists killed in Ukraine, and it's horrifying to witness media workers, some of whom appear to have been directly targeted for killing. But back in the studios in Washington and Berlin and London, there's a different form of media activism happening, and it really seems as though many journalists see their role now, working for powerful, particularly broadcast media outlets, as supporting the position of the United States and NATO, and being actual propagandists for a particular outcome and course of action. And this is happening at the same time that the Biden administration is now admitting that it has been manipulating the media by putting out unverified intelligence and pushing claims about plans to use chemical weapons. This kind of activity from the US government is not new. What I think is extraordinary or interesting is that they're now not only owning it publicly, but they are almost celebrating that they're able to use their own news media and powerful journalists to spread it as part of their war effort.
As you say, it's by no means new. You can trace it far back in a concentrated, organized form back to World War I, when the British established a Ministry of Information. We know what that means. The goal of the Ministry of Information was to put out horror stories about German war crimes, which would induce Americans to get into the war. Woodrow Wilson, and it worked. If you read US liberal intellectuals, they were accepted it. They said, yes, we have to stop these horrible crimes that British and Ministry of Information is concocting in order to mislead us. President Wilson set up his own Ministry of Public Information, meaning lies to the public, to try to encourage Americans to hate everything German. So Boston Symphony Orchestra wouldn't play Beethoven, for example. Then it goes on. Reagan had what's called an Office of Public Diplomacy, meaning an office to lie to the public and the media about what we're doing. But it's not a hard task for the government. The public relations officer of the United Fruit Company back in 1954, when the US was moving to overthrow the democratic government of Guatemala and install a vicious, brutal dictatorship, which has killed hundreds of thousands of people with US support ever since. But you have to remember how eager they were for the experience. Okay, wasn't hard. They wanted it. We fed them these lies. They were delighted because they wanted to support the state in its violence and terror. Now, that's not the journalists on the ground. There is a split, as you described. It's true of every war. So in the Nicaragua, in the Central American wars of the 1980s, there were great reporters on the ground. The Vietnam War, same thing, doing serious, courageous work, many suffering for it. You get up to the newsrooms, looks totally different. So we know how to deal with war criminals. What's the problem? We deal with them very easily. Nevertheless, this column could appear in the world's greatest newspaper, which is interesting enough, and not elicit a word of comment, which is much more interesting. Well, that tells you what you're talking about.